What's the worst thing you've ever eaten in order to be polite? Do we want to go there? Said. My grandmother was amazing on Thanksgiving. Most precious memories of a dinner. Delicious everything. Homemade bread and pies. But on a normal day her cooking was like the Great Depression. No seasoning, just food. Bilious Green said. My dad grew up during the Depression and it has shaped his attitudes around food for his entire life. 75 plus years later, he can't stand to see food go to waste, and will find ways to recycle leftovers or use things of questionable freshness. Smockatags said. This is my meal. She learned from her Depression-era raised parents to never waste food. Ever since she got a G-tube in her stomach, she has been sending me all of the food in her house. The oldest canned food was from 2007. They were frozen loaves of bread with mold growing in them because she buys from the clearance aisles. The most disgusting was some wrapped-up ground beef that smelled like death. Neardlinger said. I didn't have any limes, so I used oranges, and my family doesn't drink milk, so I used almond milk instead. The recipe said to cook at 350 for 15 minutes, but that didn't seem long enough, so I cooked it at 500 for 30 minutes. This recipe is terrible. The crust was burned, the filling had a strange nutty orange taste, and it looked nothing like the key lime pie I get at my local cafe 1/5. Snoo 68474 said. It was a jello mold with a full salad in the mold. Lettuce, tomato, olives, onions, etc. Grandmother made it. We all were forced to eat it. It is still one of the most disgusting things I have ever had to eat. Let's be jolly said. Back then all salads, i.e. anything served cold, was served with a glob of Miracle Whip. Even just a chunk of iceberg salad jetted on the side. My mom was married and learned to cook in the mid-1950s. It was common to be served a canned pear half-topped with shredded cheddar cheese and a glob of Miracle Whip as a side dish at her table. Even into the 1990s. She made shredded carrot jello salad for special occasions too. Pulse Poppers said. Pumpkin pie, but the person forgot to remove the wax paper after proofing the crust, which caused the filling to not set correctly. So imaging eating pumpkin soup out of a paper bowl but also eating the bowl at the same time. Future Nurse 19 said. It's basically a thicker crust, then layer of cheese, which can often sort of melt into the crust and be harder to identify on its own, which is then topped with the sauce, usually chunkier sauce that is raw before the pizza is cooked. The toppings would go under the sauce, but some usually get a little mixed in as you go, so you can see some of them from the top, especially something chunky like a sauce. Pepperoni would be hidden under the sauce. Definitely should not be soupy. Wanderingster 625 said. When we were kids, we were staying overnight at a family friend's house, and their sons made waffles. But they used cups of salt instead of teaspoons. My sister and I got our waffles first and started slowly choking them down until the kid's mom finally tried one. She was horrified that we'd kept eating them without saying a word. I Heart Kitty said. That's how my husband's family makes tacos. Taco seasoning is too spicy and they won't even put garlic or onion in it. I've taken over the cooking for them, and now when we have tacos, I add garlic powder, onion powder and cumin, and miraculously, there are never leftovers. Who'd have thought adding seasoning makes food taste good? Many Delicious Juices said. Lol. I'm of Italian descent and my boyfriend's mom served me an Italian meal, spaghetti with ground beef cooked in taco seasoning including the cooked off oil, topped with shredded cheddar cheese. Her, oh I'm sure you're used to much better pasta than this. Me, oh no, it's tasty, just because it's not Italian doesn't mean it isn't good. Her, what do you mean it's not Italian? Retrosonic82 said. I had a stomach bug. I hadn't kept anything down except liquid for 2 days. I had gotten to the point where I had starved myself for 24 hours and was on the dry crackers diet when my horribly smothering meal offered to make me some food. I declined. I was perfectly fine with my crackers. I wasn't hungry but would fix myself some crackers when I was. She insisted on making me food. I again declined, which sent her on a tirade about how I needed nutrients and sustenance or I wasn't ever going to get better, and she went on and on and on until I relented and said I would have a slice of toast. Her response was, I'll make you eggs on toast, and off she went. I thought to myself that I didn't have to eat it, or maybe I could just eat the toast and leave the eggs in and it'd be fine, But 10 minutes later she returns and hands me a massive plate of eggs, toast and beans, and then decided to sit on the sofa and grin at me as I ate, asking me questions like, is it alright, and do you feel better yet? And there was no way I could avoid eating it. Despite my protests, I just eat what you can, but she still insisted on sitting there and watching me, and I felt obliged to eat it. So I tried to. I really tried, but you can probably guess how it ended. It's not nice projectile vomiting beans out of your nose across the sofa, and I've never been able to eat them again. Amarantha Bix said, I hate it when people insist you're gonna be fine, or they think you're just exaggerating. When I was a kid, I was in hospital recovering from surgery. I'd had appendicitis and the bloody thing ruptured inside me. So they quickly got it out, but I had a tube in me to drain away all the infected gunk, and I was on meds and a liquid drip. Needless to say, I wasn't feeling very well. I did not have an appetite at all. I had the drip, so I wasn't going to dehydrate, but the thought of eating anything made me feel nauseous. My mom was gently nudging me to eat plain toast. I took small bites, but I couldn't handle much more. This one nurse obviously thought I was exaggerating and kept pressuring me to eat cereal. My mom wasn't happy, saying if they forced me to eat cereal now I was definitely gonna throw it up. But the nurse kept insisting. So I took 4 spoonfuls of Cocoa Pops and the inevitable happened. Projectile vomited all over my hospital bed. It was vile. Of course, as I got better I regained some appetite, but I was put off cereal for a while afterwards, haha. Sir Mooncake said, my friend's dad who had depression made us breakfast one morning. He had a good day there, and he made scrambled eggs and a lot of the eggshells was there too. He was also gonna use a little cumin, I hope, but for some reason it was kinda cinnamon. Why? We ate it anyway, and man was that just unpleasant. But his dad was a kind man and we fucking ate that shit fast like hell and with fake gusto. Skvozniak said, I was once served fish that was cooked with the scales still on it. The host left the room and I started chowing down. Awful, awful, awful. Scales stuck in my throat for the rest of the day. I thought that was how I was intended to eat it because I had never seen that before. Then the host came back in, sat down, and immediately peeled off the scales and ate it like a normal human being. If that doesn't make you feel like a jackass, I don't know what will. Kid and Burrito said, my first boyfriend loved sushi, and spent months convincing his family to go to a sushi restaurant, because he was sure they'd find something to love. They finally agree and invite me along, so I was present when my BF managed to convince his dad that the wasabi was actually whack. He proceeded to pop the entire bowl into his mouth, and then spent the next 15 minutes seriously regretting it. He had a pretty impressive tolerance for spicy food, but this just did him in. Once he caught his breath, he actually thought it was hilarious, but I just remember feeling so uncomfortable for him as he was coughing and his eyes were streaming. Pasta and Apathy said, the first time I met my wife's grandparents, they shoved a plate of savory duck at me and stared at me until I had gagged the entire lot down, then brought me more. Here is the thing, in the north of England, savory duck has nothing to do with duck, traditionally made from breadcrumbs, pig's heart, liver and fatty belly meat or bacon minced together, with herbs added for flavoring. The mixture is then shaped by hand into balls, wrapped around with pig's caul fat and then baked. This is vile enough on its own, but undercooked and soaked in watery gravy. I'm surprised I didn't end up with a tapeworm infection. Never ate anything there again. Differencia Tedman said, I was dating this girl in 2006 for a few months before I met her extended family. I'm sitting at the table getting to know everyone, and her dad, uncles and brother tell me if Nona gives me something it would be considered rude not to eat it. Well, fuck me, I ate several bowls of pasta, veggies, meats, fruits, etc. I have never been more full in my life, but dessert is en route, and that's when it happened. Her grandmother puts a mammoth piece of lemon meringue pie down in front of me, which I fucking loathe. Ate that bad boy with a smile on my face. I ended up marrying that girl 7 years later, and now we have 2 kids. Sadly, her grandmother passed from COVID last year. She was the most caring person I've ever met in my life and will miss her incredibly. She gave me her secret recipes to safeguard about 4 months before she died. Howard Henry Holmes said, my parents do something similar to this, and it's so funny. If they realize you like something, they will overstock on it constantly like it's your favorite food. I tried and enjoyed chorizo in my late teens, For several years my parents would always make sure to get chorizo every week even though I barely cooked with it after a few months. I live abroad and every time I come home Mum beams with Howard Henry Holmes. I got you some chorizo, it's in the fridge. My brother tried a prawn at dinner once and thought it was good. Cue 2 years of many bags of prawns in the fridge and constantly trying to cook them for him. No complaints. Sometimes parents are just funny how they do things to keep their kids happy, haha. Suitcasa Dreaming said, when I was 11, I moved to a small town in rural England and acquired a new best friend at school. Her at that point seemingly very normal parents' nice suburban house, 3 kids, trampoline in the backyard invited me over for dinner, and said they were making curry and rhubarb crumble. Curry and rhubarb crumble. Never in the history of mankind have words been so untrue. The curry consisted of, I swear I am not making this up, a vague mixture of deep breath, oatmeal, tofu sausages, corn, tomato juice, chopped onions, raisins, leftover broccoli leaves, kale, and scrambled eggs. The only spice in it was the tiniest smidgen of turmeric. All these ingredients were vaguely stirred together, undercooked, and stuck under a broiler for 10 minutes. They gave me a massive portion. I still don't know how, was polite enough to finish it. I'm done, I said. No, said her father. In this house, we lick our plates clean. He did. They didn't make me hold it up and lick it like they all did, but they did make me clean the plate with a piece of bread and my fork until they were satisfied. Dessert came. The rhubarb crumble was entirely unsweetened. Not so much as a raisin. I can't remember what the crumble part was, because my mind is still haunted by the memory of being forced to eat an entire bowl of unsweetened rhubarb. You know in old Looney Tunes when Suitcasa Dreaming said, characters would be tricked into eating alum and their heads would shrink? That's what eating it felt like. They made me clean my bowl of that too, and wouldn't let me leave the table until I finished. The next time, I was in middle school and as yet too polite to turn down my best friend's parents, they made spaghetti and meatballs and salad. The spaghetti was utterly plain and so undercooked it was crunchy. The meatballs consisted of a single large orb of some gray material I have yet to identify, and the salad was, I shit you not, limp boiled lettuce. Crunchy spaghetti, unidentified lumpy gray stuff, and boiled lettuce. The fascinating thing is that, while yes, these people were obviously health nuts, it was so much more than that. They were health nuts who also cooked like aliens who had never seen human food before. Or like small children making potions. One of the more edible things they served to me once was a dessert they made up which consisted of had apples rolled in corn flour with some milk poured on top. One time, they were convinced to make pizza as a treat. They decided to put an onion on it. Fair and fine, you'd think. Not in that house. They just cut the onion in half once, and stuck each unchopped half face down on one side of the pizza. Speaking of onions, one time, my friend decided to make a banana and yogurt smoothie. Her dad came in, said it wasn't healthy enough, and made her add an onion to it. They had a homemade cereal I thankfully was able to opt out of trying which 100% looked like the contents of a vacuum bag. I still have no idea what it contained. Suitcasa Dreaming said. Amazingly, it was by no means just me who experienced this. It was a small town, and every girl in my age had a selection of horror stories about being invited to dinner at this friend's house in the exact same ritualistic horror film fashion. We used to sit around comparing them at sleepovers. Age did not exempt you. One time, this friend's 6-year-old brother had a friend over for dinner at the same time. Poor soul. His mom arrived to pick him up, and wasn't allowed to take him home until he finished whatever crime against cooking was on the menu that night. Every story was the same. The ritual that never varied. Every time, these people would make a huge fanfare out of inviting you over for dinner, act all hospitable and excited, set the table, and then serve you a massive helping of the worst food in the world, and make you clean your plate of it, dessert included. Who the hell forces you to finish your dessert? It's a mystery to me. They clearly had some degree of self-awareness, because after I came to my senses and started coming up with excuses to avoid eating at their house they would tease me saying things like "Oh ho ho, you don't like our food do you?" If they had been a bit more fun and less generally puritanical sort of people, I could totally believe this was a family trolling activity where they secretly schemed to come up with the worst possible dishes, secretly filmed themselves forcing people to eat them and watched it and laughed afterwards. I could believe it. All I'm saying is I'm pretty sure they weren't aliens, but the more I type this out, the more tempted I am to believe it. Fuck it, maybe they were aliens. Before anyone asks, I copy-pasted this from a fairly popular Tumblr post I made about this a while ago. It's the same person. Emerald Gem 17 said. That's really twisted. I thought the exact same thing. Surely the parent just thought their kid was being picky or unreasonable because I would lose my shit if someone tried to withhold my child. It's borderline for me to force children to eat, especially if the portions are overly large, and then force feed dessert as well. And on top of that, forcing them to lick a plate or sop up the remains. Sounds like brushing with child abuse to me. Terrible Attitude said. I will say, I have a book of historical recipes and one of them does make reference to cooking lettuce. But it's a very old recipe clearly aimed at people unaccustomed to fresh vegetables, and it specifically instructs you not to boil the lettuce. I assumed that since this is such a massively unheard of practice in modern times, and the recipe was well over 100 years old, this was a mistake people occasionally made in the Victorian era. Apparently, people still make that mistake now. Chronix 1969 said. A cork coaster that I mistook for a wafer. I even put toppings on it, like a taco or something. I didn't really eat it out of politeness, but rather, I ate it because I didn't want any evidence remaining that would show that someone actually tried to eat a cork coaster. Edit. Okay, a little context may help. It was a company business lunch training seminar, held in the ballroom of a hotel. Food was provided, buffet style, Mexican themed. I wasn't hungry, but went along with everyone else. Sitting across the table from me was the CFO of the company. He was telling a story to everyone at the table, but he oddly wouldn't look at anyone else, just me, sitting across from him. I casually took a bite of the make-your-own-meal snack that I had made. The wafer that had the toppings piled on was on the buffet table, so I thought it was some kind of cracker or the like. One bite and I realized something was definitely wrong. I tried not to attract attention as I looked down to whatever the hell I was chewing on. That's when I realized my mistake. It was a cork coffee coaster. So yes, I ate it. My only thought was the embarrassment of leaving a half-eaten coaster on the table for someone to notice how stupid I was. Rabid Chicago said. A long time ago I used to work at a cookie store that had some free samples. The free sample circular container was in like an Easter basket style thing with thin strips of paper for decoration. One time after we took one of the containers out, a guy walks in and saw the samples, grabbed a small handful of the paper strips and put them in his mouth. He kind of froze and then walked out of the store. I waited until after he left to burst out laughing. Mac's wife said. None of it was terrible, but one year my husband and I accidentally accepted 3 invitations for Thanksgiving dinner. The first dinner was scheduled for noon and we ate a real Thanksgiving dinner, turkey, potatoes, pie. We left full and went to our second social engagement of the day, which my husband thought was going to be for beers and watching a football game at the home of one of his crew members. When we arrived around 4 p.m. it became apparent the girlfriends of his employees had cooked an entire Thanksgiving dinner. Let me clarify. We were in the Navy and stationed overseas. The girlfriends were Spanish and they worked really hard on this dinner to impress their boyfriends and their boyfriend's boss. So we ate another Thanksgiving dinner. After another full meal and a game of football, we left for our third invitation of the day, which I thought was going to be coffee and pie at our friend's home. No, it wasn't coffee and pie. It was 8:30 p.m. and there was another full Thanksgiving meal waiting for us. Our friend had set a lovely formal table and was pleased to seat us and serve us wine and hors d'oeuvres followed by another 4-course meal. When we finally arrived home around 11 p.m., I thought my stomach would burst. I had to sleep on my back because turning on either side or my stomach was painful. We vowed from that time. Jungles George said. I'm surprised I haven't seen fermented tofu, aka stinky tofu, on this list. It's not the worst food on earth. It's the worst thing on earth. Taking one bite was the darkest moment of my life. My parents are divorced, I've fought in war, I've had awful heartbreaking breakups. 10 seconds of fermented tofu was worse. My hosts were Taiwanese and good friends. They ordered it as a joke. The waiter refused, pointing at me. They insisted. He shrugged. It smelled like crap. Literally, like shit on a plate. I took one bite and blacked out. It was such an assault on my taste buds, It felt like a punch to my brain. I couldn't move or speak and everything went black for several seconds. Nobody else at the table, all Taiwanese, touched it. If nails on a chalkboard had a flavor, this would be it. Nails on a chalkboard with a side of S. Nishloaf said. Spent Easter with my friend's family. I was an international student so often stayed at different households during short breaks. There was a cheese platter and, since I love cheese and crackers, I kinda went to town on it. I remember one cheese being way inferior to the other cheeses. Not super bad, just not to my liking. But I didn't want to be rude and hog the good cheeses, so I made sure to sample the less good cheese, at least every second time. After like 20 minutes, the host's sister came over and ate some. She immediately exclaimed, "Oh my god, this is expired. I'm so sorry, I hope you didn't eat some." And I was like, maybe one or two, but don't worry. I definitely ate more than one or two. I thought it was just an acquired taste and TBH I was slowly coming round to it. My Work 93 said. A year and a bit ago I was invited by a girl I was seeing to go to a friend's house for authentic Indian food. We get there and a lady and her husband are cooking up a storm in this little apartment and it is authentic. Naan made by hand, butter chicken and curry on the stove, so we sit down and start eating, and full disclaimer, it's absolutely delicious. Now that I'm not as hungry, I start looking around the apartment and I notice some black specks moving around on the floor. I look a little closer and from having them I can tell it's bed bugs. I start looking around the apartment after seeing this and it's like waking up in a nightmare. All of a sudden I notice they are everywhere. Just from my seat I can count at least 50 on the wall. They are on the floor, the couches. I look down and there are even some on the table. I imminently got really uneasy and just sat on the edge of my seat till the girl I was seeing was ready to go. As soon as we left I was like WTF, and she had no idea what I was talking about until I explained. We went straight to her house and threw everything in the wash to make sure. It was very uneasy and gross, but food was actually good despite the threat, haha.